Hello everyone. So today you will be dealing with myofunctional and orthopedic appliances. So this is one of the most interesting, most complicated but most happening field in orthodontics, which has where diagnosis and treatment planning plays a very important role in the choice of these appliances, its fabrication and the final treatment results. So the references for this chapter are the Principles and Practice of Orthodontics by Graeber, Contemporary Orthodontics by Profit, and Art and Science of Orthodontics by Balaji. So before we are further discussing about this topic, again I'm emphasizing that from this chapter also we are expecting a lot of picture-based questions, because a lot of myofunctional and orthopedic appliances are there, and every one of them is different in their action as well as in its appliance design. So let's begin with myofunctional and orthopedic appliances. So first of all, we will be dealing with the classification of the myofunctional appliances. So compared to your conventional removable appliances, where you are using some active components like some screws, springs or elastics, the force components of the functional appliances is derived from the orofacial musculature. So that is the difference between a conventional removable appliance and a myofunctional appliance. Now, how to classify these myofunctional appliances? According to the support, that is the support, if it is obtained from the dentition, then it is a tooth-borne appliance. Whereas if the support is derived from the tissues, that is of the orofacial region, then it is a tissue-borne myofunctional appliance. Now, this tooth-borne appliances can again classified as passive as well as active. So tooth-borne passive appliances are those appliances that does not have any intrinsic force generating component. That is, they just derive the support from the dentition and redirect the forces of the orofacial musculature, but they don't have any active components like your springs or elastics. So an example for this tooth-borne passive appliances are activator and bionator. Whereas if you incorporate any active component to these passive appliances, like if you're adding a screw, an expansion screw to your activator, or if you're putting a spring to your bionator, then it becomes tooth-borne active appliance. Now, tissue-borne appliances are those myofunctional appliances which derives its support from the orofacial musculature alone. There is no support derived from the dentition. Exclusively, it is deriving its support and attachment from the orofacial region, soft tissue region or soft tissue of the orofacial region. An example for this is the functional regulator of Frankel. So, Frankel regulator is a tissue-borne myofunctional appliance, whereas tooth-borne myofunctional appliances are activator and bionator, which are passive tooth-borne appliances, and when it gets incorporated with some active components, it becomes a tooth-borne active appliance. Now, the second classification is based on their mode of action. So, the first one was depending on the support. The second one is their mode of action, which is classified as myotonic appliance, myodynamic appliance. So, that as the term implies, it is myotonic. It means the muscle. Myo means muscle. So, myotonic means this appliance is dependent on the muscle mass for their action. So an example for this is the vertical V activator. Whereas myodynamic, so dynamic means an activity. So myodynamic means muscle activity. So such appliances which depend on the muscle activity for their action are myodynamic appliance. An example for this is horizontal activator, where the stretching of the muscles or displacement of the muscle is an important factor in the success of a horizontal edge activator. Whereas myotonic means just the muscle mass. It is the strength of the muscle mass or the amount of the muscle mass that determines the action. Then it is a myotonic appliance, and an example for that is vertical V activator. Now, another simple classification is whether it is a removable appliance or a fixed functional appliance. So, the removable functional appliances include your activator, your bionator, Frankel, your oral screen. They are all removable myofunctional appliances. Whereas these myofunctional appliances, there are some myofunctional appliances which can be fixed to your banded tooth. That includes your Jasper Jumper and Herbst appliance. So Jasper Jumper and Herbst appliance are commonly used fixed functional appliances, whereas removable functional appliances includes your Activator, Bionator, Frankel and your vestibular screen. Now, Graeber and Newman has proposed a classification of myofunctional appliances into 3 groups. So the group 1 is those appliances which transmit the forces directly to the teeth. That includes your inclined plane. So your anterior inclined plane or lower anterior inclined plane, your Catalan's appliance. So that all come under group 1, where the muscle force is directly transmitted to the teeth. Now group 2 is one where they reposition the mandible. That is, when you place this myofunctional appliance, they displace the mandible, which in turn stretches the associated musculature, which creates a force that is transmitted not only to the teeth but also to the other adjoining structures. That is not only the dentition but to the jaw as well. So this includes your commonly used myofunctional appliances, that is your Activator and Bionator. So group 1 was those appliances where the force is transmitted directly to the teeth. That includes your inclined plane. Now group 2 is those appliances which are placed inside the mouth. So once they are placed inside the mouth, they will displace the mandible. So when your mandible is getting displaced, that will stretch the associated musculature. So that stretching of this musculature creates a force which is transmitted not only to the dentition but also to the adjoining structures. Now that is your group 2. Now the third category is entirely different. Here also there is repositioning of the mandible, but the force is not transmitted to the dentition, but rather their force is transmitted to the buccal vestibular region. So the supporting teeth and the bone is influenced by the changing the muscle balance. That is, they act like a shield or a screen and protects the dentition and the associated structures from the unwanted forces exerted by the orofacial musculature. Now that is your group 3. So group 1 and 2, you can see that they are transmitting a force. The first one is transmitting the force directly only to the tooth. The second one is displacing the mandible, stretching the musculature, thereby a force is generated which is transmitted not only to the dentition but also to the adjoining structures. So group 1 and 2, you can see that the force is getting transmitted to the dentition. Whereas in the third category, here also the mandible is getting repositioned, but here you are not transmitting the force to the dentition, but rather you are shielding the dentition from the unwanted forces exerted by the adjoining musculature. So that is how Graeber and Newman has classified the myofunctional appliances. Group 1, which includes the inclined plane. Group 2 includes your Activator and Bionator, and group 3 is the Frankel's appliance. So we have seen what are the classification for myofunctional appliances according to your support, according to the mode of action, whether it is removable or fixed, and finally the Graeber and Newman classification. Now I have told in the beginning only, like, it is utmost important in giving a myofunctional appliances that the diagnosis, which patient or which person is most suitable for a myofunctional appliance. So diagnosis and treatment planning are extremely important in case of myofunctional appliances. So what are the indications for giving a myofunctional appliance, or who all are ideal candidates for a myofunctional appliance? Now, the first and foremost important factor is that the patient should be growing. If the growth is completed, then the myofunctional appliance will have no action on in that patient. So, you always give the myofunctional appliances only in growing patients in pre-pubertal stage of their growth. Also, this is preferably given during your mixed dentition period. So, during mixed dentition period, we are definitely sure that the patient has a growth left or growth remaining. Now, the third important category is that class 2 skeletal persons with prognathic maxilla and retruded mandible are very ideal candidates for myofunctional appliances. Now, another requirement before when you are giving a myofunctional appliance is that the dentition should be well aligned. So, if at all is there if there is an improper inclination or axial correction, if it is required, it should be done before giving a myofunctional appliance. Especially in cases of class 2 division 2 malocclusions, first we will go for the correction of the axial inclination of your central incisors and lateral incisors. Then only you will give a myofunctional appliance. Now there are certain skeletal parameters which are equally important in giving a myofunctional appliance. The first one is that the person should be exhibiting a horizontal growth pattern with a low FMA ankle and decreased lower facial height. So a horizontal growth pattern with low FMA angle and decreased lower facial height are ideal candidates for myofunctional appliance. First, obviously if they are only in their growing stage. So prepubertal people especially during your mixed dentition period with class 2 malocclusion due to prognathic maxilla and retruded mandible with horizontal growth pattern, low FMA ankle and decreased lower facial height are ideal candidates for a myofunctional therapy. So now we will have a quick look through the history or development of myofunctional appliances, the major milestones, the people who contributed in the development of this field. So the first person we are discussing is Norman Kingsley, who introduced the term and concept of jumping the mite, that is in persons with mandibular retrusion. He introduced the concept of jumping the mite, that is advancing the mandible. This was first introduced by Norman Kingsley. Later, Pierre Robin devised monoblock appliance for people with retruded mandible, like in Robin syndrome. Now, Emil Herbst was the person who first advocated a fixed myofunctional appliance. Now, Alfred Paul Rogers was the person who coined the term myofunctional therapy. So, please note, it was Norman Kingsley who introduced the concept of jumping the bite for persons with mandibular retrusion. Now, Pierre Robin has devised the monoblock appliance for persons with Pierre Robin syndrome, where mandibular retrusion is a very common feature. And the first fixed functional appliance was developed by Emil Herbst, and the term myofunctional therapy was coined by Alfred Paul Rogers. Now we have seen that Emil Herbst was the first person who introduced the fixed functional appliance in 1909, but later this appliance lost its popularity. But it was Hans Panchers who reintroduced the concept of Herbst appliance in year 1977. Now, in the same year, when Panchers introduced the concept of Herbst appliance or fixed functional appliances, William Clark revolutionized the myofunctional therapy with the introduction of the appliance twin block. So, this is one of the most commonly used appliance now. Myofunctional appliance commonly used is a twin block appliance, which was introduced by William Clark in the year 1977. And Jasper Jumper is another fixed functional appliance which was developed by J.J. Jasper in the year 1980. So Emil Herbst in 1909 introduced the first fixed appliance, which was later reintroduced into the field by Hans Panchers in 1977, and by 1980 J.J. Jasper developed another fixed functional appliance which was called as Jasper Jumper appliance. So now we have already seen who are the ideal candidates for myofunctional appliance. So suppose we got a person who is having a class 2 malocclusion with mandibular retrusion in her mixed dentition period, like 8, 9, 10 years old girl or a boy, and he or she is having a low FMA ankle with horizontal growth pattern and reduced facial height. So immediately we can see that this person is an ideal candidate for a this person is an ideal candidate for a functional therapy, myofunctional therapy. Now the first and foremost important step after you decide which appliance you are giving, the first and foremost step in myofunctional treatment is the fabrication of your construction bite. So construction bite is nothing but it's an intermaxillary record, that is to relate the mandible to maxilla in all planes, that is your horizontal, vertical and your transverse plane. So that is an intermaxillary record, and it is the most important step for the fabrication of a myofunctional appliance. This construction bite is also known by the name working bite. So vestibular screen. So vestibular screen is a very simple functional appliances. Most of you have made it in your preclinical exercise. It was introduced by Neville in the year 1912. So the working principle of a vestibular screen is both. That is, you have a force elimination as well as a force application component. Now, force elimination is when the vestibular screen acts as a shield and protects the dentition from the unwanted forces exerted by the orofacial musculature. Now, what are the indications for this vestibular screen? So, when you are dealing with myofunctional and orthopedic appliances, it's extremely important that you understand which appliance is indicated and when. So, what are the proper indications for giving this appliance? If it is an activator or a bionator, in a particular case scenario, why are you giving this appliance? So, what is the advantage of giving this appliance over the other? So, that is the level of questions they are gonna ask. So they might give you a case scenario like so and so person at this age is having so and so musculature problems with the such a malocclusion. So which appliance are you gonna give? So that kind of questions we can expect, that is they are gonna give you case scenario based questions apart from picture based questions. That is the another relatively expected question from this chapter, case scenarios, and you have to identify the appliance. So if you are going through myofunction appliance, it is extremely important that you understand which appliance is given and when it is given and why it is given. So you should be able to differentiate why am I giving a vestibular screen to such a person, why I am giving an activator in that case, why I was giving twin block. So you should be able to justify why are we giving and that appliance. So that we can differentiate each case scenarios and should arrive at a proper decision. Now, what are the indications for vestibular screen? So, vestibular screen, the first and foremost indication is when there is a need for correcting any habits, especially like thumb sucking, lip biting, and tongue thrusting. Also, it is used in the cases of correction of mouth breathing when the airways are open. Now, mild distal occlusions or mild class 2 cases with premaxillary protrusion, in such cases also vestibular screen can be given. And open bite in deciduous and mixed dentition. Also flaccid hypertonic orofacial musculature. Now, if it is a flaccid hypertonic orofacial musculature, these muscles will exert a force on the dentition and tend to narrow the arch. So, vestibular screens can be given in such cases so that they can protect or shield the dentition from this flaccid hypertonic orofacial musculature. So, these are the indications of a vestibular screen. You can remember habits like thumb sucking, lip biting, and tongue thrusting. You know how difficult it will be when you keep a vestibular screen inside the person's mouth. He cannot suck his thumb or bite his lip or anything. Now, correction of mouth breathing is another important indication for vestibular screen, especially when the airways are open. It can also be used to correct mild class 2 or distal occlusion malocclusions with premaxillary protrusion, and open bite in the deciduous and mixed dentition can also be corrected with a vestibular screen. And also for the other important criteria is when the musculature is flaccid and hypertonic. So, a major revolution happened in the field of myofunctional appliances with the introduction of activator, which was introduced by Anderson in 1908 when he initially called it as a biomechanic working retainer. And later he teamed up with Hoppel and they developed the appliance further, or they modified the initial biomechanic working retainer and termed it as activator. So the activator, the term itself suggests the ability of this appliance to activate the muscles. Now, other names for this activator is Anderson's appliance. Obviously, it's because the Anderson was the first person to introduce it. It was also called as a monoblock, a Norwegian appliance because Anderson and Hoppel worked together in Norway, and as well as biomechanic working retainer, which was the first name given to this appliance by Anderson. Now, apart from the brief history of activator, for exam purpose, it's extremely important that we know or we identify the cases or scenarios where activator is indicated. So, first and foremost thing is that activator is ideally indicated in skeletal class 2 malocclusions, both division 1 as well as division 2. Obviously, in division 2 cases, we will always go for the alignment of the dentition first, and then only we will give any myofunctional appliance. So the same applied for activator. Now the second scenario where activator is indicated is your skeletal class 3 malocclusions. Also in class 1 malocclusions with the open bite and deep bite. So these are the four scenarios: skeletal class 2 malocclusions, both division 1 and division 2, skeletal class 3 malocclusions, class 1 open bite malocclusions, class 1 deep bite malocclusions. Now in adjunct with this, activator is indicated in children with lack of vertical development in the lower facial height. So if there is a reduced lower facial height, then also activator is indicated. So apart from these scenarios, one of the prerequisites for activator appliance is that the alignment of the dentition in both upper and lower arch should be well aligned. Especially the mandibular incisors should be upright over the basal bone. So these are the other two conditions apart from the above mentioned indications. That is, even though the patient might have a class 2 or class 3 malocclusion skeletally, it might have a open bite or deep bite, but apart from this, it's utmost important, or it's a prerequisite, that apart from these conditions, the dentition of the upper and lower arches should be well aligned, especially in the lower incisors should be upright over the basal bone. So these are the indications for the use of a activator appliance. So you should be very thorough with this, because when we are given a case scenario as a question, we should be able to make out whether this person or this child is a suitable person for activator appliance. So that is how myofunctional appliances are chosen. So we have to be very thorough, or we should be able to make a good judgment which appliance is most suitable for what kind of patients. So the conditions where activator are indicated are skeletal class 2 malocclusions, both division 1 and division 2, skeletal class 3 malocclusions, class 1 open bite, class 1 deep bite, and children with lack of vertical development in the lower facial height. So apart from these, there are other two prerequisites for giving an activator appliance. One is that the alignment of the dentition in both upper and lower arches should be well aligned, and also the lower incisors in the mandibular arch should be upright over the basal bone. Now, who all are contraindicated for an activator therapy? Most important thing, if the patient is not having a skeletal problem, we won't give an activator or any other myofunctional appliances. Also, if the person is having a crowded teeth due to tooth size arch length discrepancies, then they are also contraindicated for the use of an activator. Now, increased lower facial height with vertical growth pattern. This is another contraindication for the use of the activator appliance. And finally, severely labially tipped lower incisors. So if the lower incisors are severely proclined, then also an activator is not an ideal choice of treatment. So these are the major contraindications for activator therapy. First one is patients with crowded teeth, which is caused due to arch length tooth size discrepancies. Second one is patients exhibiting extreme vertical growth pattern with increased lower facial height. And third one is the persons who are having severely proclined or labially tipped lower incisors. Now, with regard to the appliance fabrication, activator basically consists of a single block of acrylic which seats both the upper and lower arches. So please note the picture of this appliance. It consists of a single block of acrylic mass which is seated in the both upper and lower arches, and the only wire component in an activator usually is an upper labial bow, which is made of 0.8 or 0.9 mm wire, and sometimes we can go for incisal capping or labial lower bow, lower labial bow is done so as to prevent the lower incisors from tipping labially. So these are the modifications. Ideally, an activator consists of a single block of acrylic which is seated, accommodating both the upper and lower dentition, and the only wire component will be an upper labial bow which is made of 0.8 or 0.9 mm wire. Sometimes we can give an acrylic capping or a lower labial bow so as to prevent the proclination of the lower incisors. So please note the picture and identify, or you should be able to identify when you are given a picture like this and asked which appliance is this. You should be able to make out this is how an activator look like. So the appliance is an activator. So when we were discussing about activator, we have seen that it's a very bulky appliance. It's a completely enclosed single piece of acrylic, and due to this bulkiness and difficulty in wearing it full time, Bionator was developed by Balters. It's actually a modification of the activator by Balters that led to the discovery or introduction of Bionator. So please look at the picture and see this. See that in Bionator, the palatal region is a cutout. There is no acrylic in the palatal region, unlike your conventional activator. But rather, the palatal region you have a coffin shaped spring. And also the labial bow is slightly modified in this. So this palatal acrylic has been cut out, so it's a bit less bulky and there is a leeway space in the palatal region, so which is more comfortable for the patient. So these are the modifications which was improvised by Balters in case of Bionator compared to your activator. Now the Bionator is of three types. The standard Bionator, which is used in the correction of class 2 malocclusions. Now reverse Bionator is used in the correction of class 3 malocclusion, and there is one more modification for the standard Bionator which is used in the correction of open bite. So that is your open bite Bionator. So the conventional Bionator which is used for the correction of class 2 malocclusions, then there is a reverse Bionator where the labial bow is in the lower arch, it's not in the upper arch. So that is used in the correction of class 3 malocclusion, and the third one is one which is used in the correction of open bite. So now we are going to discuss about a unique appliance. So far when we were discussing activator and Bionator, they were all working on the principle of force application. That is, when they are placed in the mouth, the mandible is displaced, which causes the stretching of the muscles, and that is how it brings about the resultant mandibular advancement. Now, when we were discussing about the classification of myofunction appliances, the classification according to the force, like tooth-borne, active and passive, and third category was the tissue-borne appliances. So Frankel's functional regulator is such a tissue-borne appliance where it works on the principle of force elimination. That is, it is actually acting in the vestibular region of your dentition. It's not acting directly on the dentition, but rather protects the dentition from the unwanted influences exerted by your orofacial musculature. So that is why it is working on the principle of force elimination. So hence the Frankel's functional regulator is a unique myofunctional appliance compared to your conventional other myofunction appliances like your activator, Bionator or twin block or any other fixed functional appliances. The Frankel's functional regulator is one such appliance which acts by force elimination. Please look at the picture. You can see that it's actually acting in the vestibular region of your dentition, and it protects the dentition away from the unwanted influences of your lips, your cheeks and other muscles in the orofacial region. So please note the unique design of Frankel's functional regulator. This is a quite complicated appliance, or it is appears as a complicated appliance because it has a numerous wire components. So it is always a favorite choice for the examiners to paste a picture of this appliance and ask you to identify this appliance. So please look at the basic design. There is no acrylic block in the dentition. There is no acrylic which is intercepting between the dentition, but rather there is an acrylic mass. It acts like a vestibular screen. It's similar to vestibular screen, except in the anterior region you have some labial bow and lip shields. So other than that, in the buccal region, it is similar to a vestibular screen. It is acting as a shield. So that is how you identify a Frangel's functional regulator. Now the Frangel's functional regulator is classified into 4 categories. Frangel's functional regulator 1, then you have the regulator 3, regulator 4, and there is one more modification, which is regulator 5. Now what are the indications for each of these functional regulators? So type 1 is further subdivided into 1A, 1B and 1C. 1A is used in class 1 deep bite cases with the protruded maxillary and retruded mandibular incisors. So 1A, the first one is always for your class 1 malocclusions with the deep bite. Now coming to 1B and 1C. It is used in class 2 division 1 malocclusions. 1B is used in class 2 division 1 cases with overjet not exceeding 7 millimeters. So 1B is used in class 2 division 1 cases with overjet not exceeding 7 millimeters, whereas 1C is used in class 2 division 1 cases where overjet is exceeding 7 millimeters and the sagittal dysplasia that exceeds an end-to-end cuspal relationship. So the class 2 malocclusion is a full-on class 2 malocclusion, not a end-on malocclusion, and the overjet is exceeding more than 7 millimeters. In such cases we use the Frankel's functional regulator 1C. So the Frankel's appliance, first one is the type 1, which is again subdivided into 1A, 1B and 1C. So 1A is used in class 1 deep bite cases with protruded maxillary and retruded mandibular incisors. 1B is used in class 2 division 1 cases with deep bite and overjet is not exceeding 7 millimeters. 1C is used in class 2 division 1 cases where overjet is exceeding more than 7 millimeters. Now coming to Frankel's regulator 2, 3, 4 and 5. So 2 is always used in class 2 division 2. Also sometimes in class 2 division 1 malocclusions also the same appliance can be used, but it is ideally indicated in class 2 division 2 cases. Now FR3, that is your functional regulator 3, is used in class 3. So that's not confusing. FR3 is used in class 3 malocclusions. Now FR4 is used in open bite malocclusions. And finally your Frankel's regulator type 5 is used as a modification of your conventional Frankel when it is incorporated with a headgear. So your functional regulator along with your headgear is what the functional regulator type 5, that is FR5. So I will again repeat the indications of each of this Frankel's appliance. Type 1, which is subdivided as 1A, 1B and 1C. 1A is used in class 1. So type 1A is used in class 1 with deep bite. Now type 1B is used in class 2 division 1. So class 2 division 1 with overjet less than 7 millimeters. And Frankel's regulator 1C is used in class 2 division 1 cases with overjet more than 7 millimeters. So that is with the type 1 regulator. Now coming to type 2, as the name indicates, it is used in class 2 D2. So that is your type 2. Now type 3 is used in class 3 malocclusion. So that's not at all confusing. Type 2 is in class 2 D2 and type 3 is in class 3. Now type 4 is where it is used in open bite malocclusions, and type 5 is the functional regulators which incorporate a headgear. Now, one of the most popular or well accepted myofunctional appliances is the twin block appliance, which was developed by William Clark in 1977. So this is only myofunctional appliance which is separated into an upper and lower block. So that is one of the reasons why this was well received by the patients as well as the practitioners, and it's much popular usage. So you can see the picture. It shows a twin block appliance which has an upper and lower bite planes which having an inclination. So at the point of contact between the upper and lower bite blocks, there is an inclined plane. So this inclined plane is the fundamental mechanism by which a twin block appliance is acting. Now, the twin block appliance basically consists of an upper and lower inclined plane with an angulation of 70 degree. So, why this angulation of 70 degree? It's because this is the angle which can effectively displace the mandible forward. Earlier, the twin block was constructed with a 90-degree angulation, but the 90-degree angulation was not found enough adequate to displace the mandible. There is no gliding motion of the mandible. So 70-degree angulation is the most effective angulation for guiding the mandible into an anterior position. Now, other modifications or other components of the twin block appliance is the modified arrowhead clasp, which is we have already seen when we were discussing about the removable appliances, which is also called as your delta clasp. Now, in addition to that, it also have ball and clasp. Ball and clasp is placed on the lower anterior region. Please look at the picture. You can see that on the lower anterior region between the incisors you have a ball and clasp, and the upper labial bow can also be added so as to prevent the proclination of the upper anteriors. It's not a compulsory component, but labial bow can also be included in the basic design of the twin block appliance. But basically the twin block consists of your acrylic biplanes with inclination at 70-degree angles with the delta clasp so as to retain the bite blocks on the posterior teeth, as well as for additional retention you have the ball and clasp between your lower incisors and upper incisors, and in addition to that you can also include an upper labial bow so as to prevent the proclination of the incisors. Now, certain clinical considerations with regard to twin block appliance which are extremely important from an exam point of view. So, the twin block is actually indicated in persons who have class 2 malocclusions, skeletal malocclusions with a severe mandibular protrusion. So, they are the ideal patients for a twin block appliance with a horizontal growth pattern. Now, if you are giving a twin block appliance, the patient is having both excessive overjet as well as deep bite, we always go for the correction of the deep bite prior to the correction of the excessive overjet. So, bite before jet, that is the principle that we follow in case of a twin block appliance. We always go for the correction of the deep bite prior to your anteroposterior discrepancies. And once you place the appliance, the recall is done within 1 week. And the third thing is that always whenever you are advancing the mandible, not only with twin block appliance, even with your activator also, when you are trying to advance the mandible, as one of the side effects of it is that the lower incisors tend to procline. So this proclination of the lower incisors can be prevented by interproximal reduction. So prior to your mandibular advancement, we can do interproximal reduction so as to prevent the proclination of your lower incisors. So these are some clinical tips with respect to twin block appliance which can be asked in a clinical scenario question in your exam. Now, so far we were discussing about myofunctional appliances where you don't have any active components but you just modify the orofacial musculature so as to bring about the changes in the dentition as well as the adjoining skeletal component. Now, suppose if you are applying force to the dentition or force to your orofacial region, you can basically have two types of forces. One is your orthodontic force which moves the teeth. The other one is your orthopedic forces, that is heavy forces over 400 grams that can bring about the changes in the skeleton. It's not in the dentition, because if heavy forces are applied, it tends to cause us hyalinization. So we have already seen that during the hyalinization phase there is no tooth movement because no resorption is happening. Now, in such cases the tooth movement is prevented, but such heavy forces can cause us the movement of your skeletal tissue. So, such a purely orthopedic movement is seen when heavy forces of 400 grams is applied for at least 10 to 12 hours per day. So, that is the principle of using an orthopedic appliance where you bring about changes in the skeletal tissues. It's not in the dentition, but rather it is the changes in the skeletal tissues which are brought about by your orthopedic appliances. So please remember here the important thing for us is that the force magnitude should be more than 400 grams and it should be applied for at least 10 to 12 hours per day. That's the minimum requirement so as to bring about any change in the skeletal tissues. And also why this orthopedic forces are not causing tooth movement is because this heavy forces causes hyalinization which leads to undermining resorption, and during undermining resorption there is no tooth movement. So please remember these vital things which are extremely important from our exam. So these are the list of the recommended extraoral force levels which is required for per side. So please note that it is for a single side. So these recommended force levels are important from an MCQ point of view. So if it is a completely mixed dentition period, that is your early mixed dentition period, then the recommended force, extraoral force level per side is 250 to 300 grams. Suppose if it is during the exfoliation period, that is your late mixed dentition stage, then the force level will be slightly reduced because excessive forces that time can cause exfoliation or aggravate the exfoliation. So during the exfoliation period, you go for a bit less of amount of force, that is 150 to 250 grams. And during full permanent dentition, then again the force level is raised, it is 400 to 500. So that is like your what Graeber said, the force level for orthopedic tooth movement should be more than 400 grams. So full permanent dentition, you always apply 400 to 500 grams of force per side. Now once the desired orthopedic movement is achieved, that is you are protracting your maxilla or retracting your mandible, once you achieve the desired the skeletal movement, then you have to place this appliance again for a time period so as to retain whatever results we have achieved. So during this retention period, the amount of extraoral force level is less than 400. So it is 150 to 400 grams per side. So please remember, during the mixed dentition period, that is your early mixed dentition period, full mixed dentition period, the force level that is needed to produce extraoral force level or that is needed to produce skeletal changes are 250 to 300 grams. Now during late mixed dentition period, that is when during the exfoliation period, you can go for a little bit less force. So it will be less than 250, 150 to 250. Now during your full permanent dentition, the force level is 400 to 500 grams per side. And retention in full permanent dentition, during your retention phase, again the force level will be less, that is 150 to 400. So please remember, during the mixed dentition period, it is 250 to 300. Mixed dentition period during exfoliation will be slightly less than that, so that is 150 to 250. During the permanent dentition period, which is extremely important because that is the period when which we apply the maximum force, so that is 400 to 500. And during retention period, again the force level will be slightly less than that in the permanent dentition period, that is 150 to 400 grams per side. So now this also you should stress, it is per side, it is not for the entire dentition. So if you are asked a question, if that is the what is the amount of the force that can be applied for an orthopedic movement during a full permanent dentition to a maxillary arch, if they are asking for a maxillary arch, then you should remember that it is per side, it is 400 to 500. So if the entire arch, it will be more than that. But if the question is like it is per side, like that the option is given as per side, then you can go for the answer 400 to 500 grams per side. Now, as we have seen during the myofunctional appliance also, we were discussing the indications. The important criteria for myofunctional as well as orthopedic appliance is the age of the patient and the growth status. So, for orthopedic appliance to be effective, it is most effective during your mixed dentition period because it can make use of your prepubertal growth spurt. So, orthopedic appliances are most effective during your mixed dentition period and it's before your prepubertal growth spurt. And one more thing is that even though you can place the orthopedic appliance during the mixed dentition period, like your 7 years old or 9 years old children, you can give orthopedic appliances, they should be retained until the growth is completed because as the appliances changes not only the expression of the growth but also they can change the underlying growth pattern. So the chances of relapse will be more. So hence once you place an appliance, it should be retained until the growth is completed. So even though you are keeping the appliance during the mixed dentition period, until the growth spurt is completed or until the permanent dentition stage is reached, you have to retain the orthopedic appliance, or you can modify the orthopedic appliance as a retainer so as to prevent the relapse. So we have seen the amount of the force applied. So the amount of the force applied during each dentition we have already discussed. During mixed dentition period, 250 to 300 grams per side. During exfoliation stage of mixed dentition, 150 to 250 grams per side. Full permanent dentition, 400 to 500 grams per side. And retention will be 150 to 400 grams per side. Then we have seen the age of the patient for orthopedic appliance, which is during your mixed dentition period. Now the third important factor in the force application with respect to orthopedic appliance is the timing. So there is some idea, or so there is some evidence that there is an increase in the release of growth hormones during the evening and night, and is associated with the sleep. So it is advisable for the children to wear these orthopedic appliances during the evening and throughout the night. So that we can make use of, or we can make the take advantage of the increased growth hormone release during the evening. So when you're giving an orthopedic appliance, it is important to identify the age factor. The second thing is the amount of the force required, and third thing is the duration which the appliance is being worn, or the time during which the appliance is being worn, which is preferably during you start wearing it during the evening and continue it wearing throughout the night, so that we can take advantage of the increased release of growth hormones. Now we have seen regarding orthopedic appliances, the timing of the appliance, the age factor, and the amount of the force level. Now let's talk about headgear, which is a commonly used orthopedic appliance which is used during the growth period to intercept or correct skeletal malocclusions. So basically it is to distalize the maxilla as well as the maxillary dentition, and it also can be used as an adjunct to control or gain anchorage. So headgear is basically used for the correction of class 2 malocclusions due to prognatic maxilla, so as to distalize the maxilla as well as maxillary dentition, and also as an adjunct during orthodontic treatment, so as to gain anchorage or control anchorage. Now the basically headgear consists of the three components. The one is your face bow. So face bow commonly used with the headgear is an inner bow outer bow type, or it can be a J-hook type of face bow. The picture here shows an inner bow outer bow type face bow. So this inner bow outer bow type, the outer bow can be of three dimensions, can be short, medium or long. So short ones are where the outer bow will be less in length than the inner bow, and medium one is when the inner bow is of the equal length of the outer bow, and long ones, as shown in the picture, the outer bow will be larger than or longer than the inner bow. So face bow, it's basically of two types, inner bow, outer bow type, or it can be a J-hook type of face bow. And in three scenarios the inner bow outer bow can present, whereas short, medium and long. Short is when outer bow is smaller than the inner bow, medium is when outer bow is of the same size of that of the inner bow, and finally the long one where outer bow is longer than the inner bow. Now the second element is your force element. So that is the part of this entire headgear assembly which provides the force. So that can be either by springs, elastics or some stretchable material. So this force element actually connects the face bow to your head cap or cervical strap. So that is their third component. So the third component is the head cap or cervical strap, which takes the anchorage. So you have a face bow, then there is a force element. Force element can be springs or elastics which connects the face bow and your head cap or cervical strap. Head cap or cervical strap is the component which provides the anchorage, which can be derived from the cervical region or your occipital region. So this is the basic assembly of a headgear. Now based on the site of the anchorage, the headgears can be three types. So cervical headgear, as the name suggests, the cervical headgear is taking anchorage from your cervical region, that is your neck region. Now occipital headgear is one component which takes the anchorage from the occipital region of your head, and the third one is the parietal region or hypal region, where the anchorage is derived from the higher part of your skull. So this is the basic classification of the headgear based on the site of the anchorage. One is your cervical headgear. Please look at the picture where it is marked as C. That is, the anchorage is derived from the cervical or the neck region. The second category is the occipital headgear, which is marked as O in the picture, which derives anchorage from the occipital region of your skull. And third category is the parietal headgear, where the anchorage is derived from the skull at the higher point of the skull, which is denoted as P in the picture. Now, before we discuss the biomechanics of the headgears, you should understand two things. One is the center of resistance of the maxilla and the center of resistance of the maxillary dentition. So first we discuss about the center of resistance of the maxilla. Please look at the picture where it is marked as a red dot. Here the center of resistance of the maxilla is located in the postero-superior aspect of your zygomatico-maxillary suture. So center of resistance of maxilla is located at the postero-superior aspect of the zygomatico-maxillary suture. Now the second red dot which is marked here is the center of resistance of your maxillary dentition, which is located between the two premolars, the roots of the two upper premolars. So it's extremely important that you understand this before we further discuss the biomechanics of a headgear. You have two different center of resistance. One is for the maxilla, that is your skeletal component. Then the second is for your dental component. So maxillary dentition's center of resistance is located between the roots of the upper premolars, whereas the center of resistance of maxilla as such is located at the postero-superior aspect of your zygomatico-maxillary suture. So now let's discuss each of these headgears based on the site of anchorage. The first one is your cervical headgear, whose anchorage is derived from the nape of the neck. Now, when you're giving an headgear, it's basically to intercept the growth of your dentition, your skeletal component, especially your maxilla. Now, apart from that, the headgears can also help in distalization of the dentition as well as the maxilla as such. Now, an advantage of giving cervical headgear, that is, cervical headgear can achieve the above mentioned two things. The first one is to intercept the growth of the unwanted skeletal component of the maxilla. The second one is to distalize the maxilla as well as the maxillary dentition. Now the third thing is that when you are giving a cervical headgear, since it is obtaining anchorage from the neck region, as a side effect of it, it can tend to cause the extrusion of your lower molars. So it is deriving anchorage from the neck region and it can cause the extrusion of the maxillary molars. So this extrusion of the maxillary molars can cause an increase in the lower facial height. So imagine if you are giving an appliance and it is going to cause a increase in lower facial height. So obviously the ideal candidate for giving such an appliance will be patients with a reduced facial height, that is patients who having low mandibular plane angle. So they will achieve three purposes when you are having a cervical headgear. First thing is it can intercept the growth of the maxilla. Second thing is it can cause the distal movement of the maxillary dentition and as well as your maxilla. And third one is that when you are giving a cervical headgear, there is extrusion of the upper molars, which can increase the lower facial height. So an ideal candidate for cervical headgear are those persons who are having a low mandibular plane angle and a reduced lower facial height. Now coming to occipital headgears. So occipital headgears, they derive anchorage from the back of the head. So occipital headgears are deriving anchorage from the back of the head, that is your occiput region of the skull. This type of headgear actually produces a distal force component as well as a superiorly directed force on the maxilla as well as the maxillary dentition. So please note, when you are giving a cervical headgear, it have a distal component. Apart from that, it tend to cause the extrusion of the upper molars. But if you are giving an occipital headgear, it is having only two components of force. One is your distal force, then the other one is a superiorly directed force towards your maxilla as well as your maxillary dentition. Now, apart from your cervical headgear and occipital headgear, you can always go for a combination headgear. So, more combination headgear is like your medium pull headgear. So, please remember when we were talking, parietal headgear was called as high pull headgear, but combination headgear is one. It's a medium pull headgear. So, in this type of headgears, there is occipital and cervical anchorage will be combined. So, that is why it is called as a combination headgear. And when the force exerted by the both, that is by your occipital and cervical region, if the force exerted by them is both are equal in magnitude, then the net effect will be a distal and slight upward force. So, if the forces exerted by them are taken into consideration, that is both cervical and occipital, if they are taken into consideration, the net result will be a force which is slightly distal and upward. So, that is the combination headgear or medium pull headgear, which combines the anchorage derived from your cervical region as well as your occipital region. Now, the advantage of this combination headgear is that it tends to produce a distal and slightly upward force. So we are going to discuss about the biomechanics of the headgears, how when we alter the line of force of application, how it brings about the changes in the skeleton as well as the dentition. So to understand this, we have to remember where the center of resistance of maxilla and maxillary dentition is located. Now, in the first scenario, the line of force for a cervical headgear is passing below the center of resistance of the skeletal tissues as well as the dentition. So, please look at the picture on your left side. You can see that here the line of force, which is denoted by the black line from extending from the outer bow. The inner bow is being inserted into the molar tubes and the outer bow is extending below the center of resistance of maxilla as well as your maxillary dentition. So, in such a scenario, here both the center of resistance of the dentition and the skeletal tissues are above the line of the force. So, here the rotation of the dentition as well as the skeletal tissues are in the same direction, that is, it is producing a clockwise rotation. Now, you have a second scenario where, please look at the picture on the right side. You can see that here you have altered the line of force application. It is below the center of resistance of maxilla. So, same as what we have seen before, the line of force and its relation to the skeletal tissues is the same here. But here the line of force is above the center of resistance of the dentition. So, what happens is that the rotation of the maxilla will be in the clockwise direction, similar to what we have seen before. But the rotation of the dentition will get changed because here the line of force is passing above the center of rotation or center of resistance of the dentition. So now here the dentition will be rotating in an anti-clockwise direction. So please understand that when you are giving a cervical headgear and if the line of force is always below the center of resistance, then the dentition as well as the skeleton will move in a clockwise manner. But if you give a line of force which is above the center of resistance, then it can produce an anti-clockwise rotation. Now it's about the occipital headgear, the biomechanics of the occipital headgear. Where please look at the picture, you can see that there is a slight difference in the line of force compared to your cervical headgear, because here the line of force is distal and in an upward direction, whereas in cervical headgear the line of force was a distal and in a downward direction. Now, when you change the line of force with respect to the center of resistance of maxilla and maxillary dentition, it is similar to that of your cervical headgear. That is, if the line of force is below the center of resistance, then it can produce the clockwise rotation of maxilla as well as your dentition. And please look at the picture on your right side. You can see an altered scenario where the line of force is below the center of resistance of maxilla, but it is above the center of resistance of the dentition. And in such cases it produces a clockwise rotation of maxilla and a counterclockwise rotation of your dentition. So that is similar to that of your cervical headgear. So overall, to summarize, you have to understand that when you are giving a line of force below the center of resistance, it produces a clockwise rotation of maxilla as well as the dentition. But if you are giving a line of force above the center of resistance, then it can produce an counterclockwise rotation. So below the center of resistance, it is a clockwise rotation, and above the center of resistance, it is a counterclockwise rotation. So after discussing about headgear, the next orthopedic appliance we are discussing is the face mask. So when headgear was used for the interception of excessive growth of maxilla, face mask is used in a reverse condition. That is, when you want to protract a maxilla, then a protraction headgear or a face mask is used. So the indication for using a face mask is that when you have a prognathic mandible and a retrusive maxilla, and you have to correct it in a growing patient. So here again, in every orthopedic and myofunctional appliance, it is the growth status which is at most important, and the skeletal condition which indicates the face mask is your retrusive maxilla and prognathic mandible. Now it aids in pulling the maxillary structures forward and pushes the mandibular structures backward. In addition to that, that is apart from the class 3 scenario where you have a retrusive maxilla and prognathic mandible, other than that, if a child is undergoing a posterior displacement of the chin, then after post that surgery or post that treatment, this can be also used for bending the condylar neck, and that can stimulate the TMJ adaptation. So in such scenarios also a face mask is advocated so that it bends the condylar neck and thereby stimulate the TMJ adaptations to the posterior displacement of the chin. So in headgear, we have seen the sites of anchorage being your cervical region, your occipital region, and your parietal region. Now in case of the face mask, the anchorage is derived from the chin, the forehead, that is your skull, and then from chin and forehead. So it's from three sides that you derive the anchorage for your face mask. One is from your chin, the second is from your chin and the forehead combined, and third one is anchorage from your skull. Now there are different types of reverse pull headgear or your face mask. So the first one was the protraction headgear or reverse pull headgear developed by Hickam in the 60s, which uses the anchorage from the chin and the top of the head. Now the second model is the Dallaire type of reverse pull headgear. So please look at the picture and identify the pattern of the face mask type proposed by Dallaire. So in all these appliances, it is important that you should be able to differentiate between the face mask, the Turbinger model, Dallaire and Petit type. So the first one is your Dallaire type. Please note that it is similar to Hickam. You have the anchorage from your forehead as well as your chin. But this one is having a rigid metal shape and it is square in shape. So please note, it is deriving anchorage from the forehead as well as your chin. So you have attachment in forehead as well as your chin, and then it is square in framework and it is kept away from the face. So it has a forehead cap and a chin head cap, and there is a wire connecting from the running in front of the mouth. So there is a wire running in front of the mouth which is used for the attachment of the elastic, and it has a metal framework which is connecting the forehead and the chin, which is square in shape. So the Dallaire face mask is the one which is square in shape. Now the second type is your Turbinger model. So Turbinger model, the difference is that here also the attachment is derived from the forehead and the chin, but the rods are running, that is running from the forehead cap to the chin cap, and it extends in the middle of the midline of the face, and it's shaped in such a way that to interference with the nose can be avoided. So in Dallaire model, you have a metal framework which was squarish in shape, which was running on the either side of the face. But here in the Turbinger model, you have a metal framework which is running in the midline of the face, and again there will be a crossbar in front of the mouth so as to engage the elastics. So Turbinger model, as the name suggests, it's like a tube like structure and it is running in the middle of the face. Now the third category is the Petit type of face mask, which is very easy to identify. It is like you have a metal framework which connects the attachments in the forehead and the chin, but it is connected by a single rod. So there is a single rod running in the midline from the forehead cap to the chin cap. That is your Petit type of face mask. So far we have seen three types. One is your Dallaire type, which had a square framework, the Tubinger model, which had two metal rods. There are two metal rods running in the midline of the face, and the Petit type of face mask, which have a single rod running in the midline of the face. So the advantage is that of the Petit mask is that the adjustments can be made in the forehead, chin cup and the crossbar so as to suit the patient. Now chin cup. Chin cup is used to restrict the forward and downward growth of the mandible. So far we have seen headgear, which is used to restrict the forward growth of the maxilla, whereas you have seen the reverse pull headgear, where you want a protraction of the maxilla and a backward push on the mandible. Now the third scenario is using a chin cup, which is indicated in class 3 malocclusions with the mandibular prognathism, so that we can restrict the forward and downward growth of the mandible. So chin cups are of two types. One is your occipital pull chin cup and the third one is your vertical pull chin cup. So occipital pull chin cup derives anchorage from the occipital region of the head. So that is the most commonly used type of chin cup, which is used in class 3 malocclusions with mild to moderate mandibular prognathism. So this is actually successful in patients who can bring their mandible or who can bring their incisors in an edge-to-edge position at centric relationships, and it is effective in growing age period, that is like 4 to 9 years of age. So class 3 malocclusions, mild to moderate malocclusions with the mandibular prognathism, and successful in patients who can bring their incisors in an edge-to-edge position at centric relationship. Even in patients with slightly protrusive lower incisors, it's also in that cases also this is successful, because it can invariably produce a lingual tipping of the lower incisors. So occipital pull chin cup, it is derives its anchorage from the occipital region of your head, and it is indicated in class 3 cases with mild to moderate mandibular prognathism, especially those persons who can bring their incisors to an edge-to-edge position at centric relationship, and those who have a proclined lower incisors, because this occipital chin cup invariably can produce a lingual tipping of your lower incisors. So that's why it is indicated in those scenarios. Now the second type of chin cup is your vertical pull chin cup, which derives its anchorage from the parietal region of the head. So this is indicated in patients with the mandibular prognathism and steep mandibular plane angle and excessive anterior facial height. So it is deriving its anchorage from the parietal region, that is from the higher part of your head. So it will exert a force which will not only restrict the forward growth of the mandible and also tends to pull the mandible upwards. So you can have a counterclockwise rotation of the mandible, which is advantageous in cases with steep mandibular plane angle and excessive anterior facial height and an anterior open bite. So we are concluding with our discussion regarding to myofunctional and orthopedic appliances. So with respect to myofunctional and orthopedic appliances, an important aspect is how to diagnose whether a case is a suitable case for a myofunctional or orthopedic treatment. In that, you have to consider the growth status, the age of the patient, especially not the dental age but rather your skeletal age. So that you have to correlate with what all factors we have learned in the chapter 1 as well as in the chapter 4, which was dealing with the diagnosis. So once you diagnose whether the patient is suitable, then you have to further subdivide or subcategorize which category of appliance is most suitable for this patient. So that depends on the type of the malocclusion, the growth pattern, especially the patient is exhibiting if a vertical growth pattern, such patients are not suitable for myofunctional appliances, and also the incisor position. So all these parameters has to be taken into consideration. So from this chapter, especially with regard to myofunctional appliances, you can get questions with the case scenario, like a person of such an age presenting with such malocclusions. So what type of the appliance is most suitable? Now the second category of questions you can expect from this chapter is picture based questions, where we can get a picture of any of the appliances. It can be very simple appliances, which can be your activator or tape in block, or can be complicated ones with not much commonly seen or used by undergraduate people. So that can be your Frankels or any of the headgear, and if they can give an headgear, they can specifically ask you which type of headgear is, which is Delaire, Petit Mat or Tubinger. So you should be thorough with picture based questions. I suggest, like as I have suggested before also, please go through the pictures. You can either follow the PPT, or if you don't want to strain much with your eyes, you can go through your basic textbooks, whether it is your Balaji or Gurkirat Singh. Any standard orthodontic textbook will definitely have good colorful pictures of these appliances. So when you have a free time, just go through these pictures and try to understand how these appliances will look like, and then you try to remember in which scenario this appliance is used. So that can help you in questions. Sometimes they can give you a scenario, a case scenario, and then ask you a picture of this appliance, and then you can like that you can get questions. Like suppose the patient is having a class 2 malocclusion with favorable growth pattern, upright incisors in a mixed dentition period. Now one of these appliances, or they can get the question like the appliance shown in this picture is a suitable appliance for this type of malocclusion, and then identify the appliance. So like that also you can get questions. So if you're giving a combined scenario where the picture of the appliance is also there, and they have also given you a case scenario, then you should be able to correlate which appliance is this and why it is so used. So please go through the pictures of the appliance and indications for using these appliances, and what are the contraindications. You should be thorough with that also. So please try to read this chapter or approach this chapter in such a manner. Please try out the questions, and feel free to ask any doubts. Thank you.